In a quiet village, long before city lights touched the land we now call Ghana, a boy was born small, silent, and wrapped in mystery. His name, Kwame Anokye. Some say he didn't cry at birth. Others swear the moment he touched the earth, thunder cracked, and the air grew thick with the smell of strange herbs. To the villagers, this wasn't just folklore. This was a sign. But how does a child barely old enough to carve wood or herd goats become the soul of one of Africa's most powerful empires? How does a teenager rise, not with a sword, but with a leaf and sacred words, to unite warring clans and summon kings into being? It sounds impossible, but it happened. You see, Africa's history is often told through the eyes of warriors, conquerors, and elders. Yet hidden beneath that canopy are the youth sharp, intuitive, spiritual. And among them stood Kwame Anokye. Not just a boy, not just a dreamer, but a teen who would carry the sacred stool of power, the Golden Stool, on his back, in spirit and in flesh. At the age of 16, when most boys were learning to track game in the forest or whisper love to girls at moonrise, Kwame was speaking to gods. He didn't speak much during the day, but at night, under moonlight, he'd be found with his hands in the soil, whispering to the ancestors, carving signs with ash, and laying down rituals that no one taught him because they said he remembered them from another life. Born in a Wukugwar in the late 1600s, Kwame was not of royal blood. His father was a commoner, herbalist, known more for his quiet wisdom than any fame. But it was his mother's lineage, deeply connected to ancient priesthood, that stirred questions. Villagers said her womb was chosen, that dreams had spoken of a child who would bind the scattered Akan people into one soul. But still he was just a boy. And yet, by the time he turned 16, chiefs bowed before him, not because of fear, not because of wealth, but because this teenage boy, skin still smooth, was still cracking, called down a sacred stool from the heavens. A stool no one could touch without trembling. A stool said to hold the very soul of the Ashanti people. Imagine that. In a world dominated by grown men and hardened warriors, a teenager stood at the center of a storm and didn't flinch. He didn't scream. He didn't fight. He simply knew. And because he knew, others followed. But who was he really? Was he a prophet? A spiritual prodigy? A vessel of ancestral wisdom reborn in a young body? Or was he just a boy with a gift born into a moment that needed him? This is the story of Kwame Anokye, the teen who became the spiritual architect of the Ashanti Empire, the one who didn't need an army to conquer but instead used rituals, oaths, and divine conviction to unite a people that had never stood as one. Before there was an empire, there was a boy. Before there were kings, there was a whisper. And that whisper carried the voice of Kwame Anokye. Now, come closer. Listen. Because this story, it doesn't begin with a throne. It begins with fireflies, a forgotten forest, and a child who heard things no one else could. By the time Kwame Anokye turned 10, he had already stopped playing with the other boys in the village, while they chased birds with slingshots or practiced their spear throws by the riverbank. Kwame could be found sitting alone beneath the tall Nyamejua tree, his eyes half closed, his fingers drawing patterns in the dirt. His peers whispered that he was strange, too quiet, too still. But the elders, they watched him with a different kind of gaze. In the small village of Owukugwa, nestled among the Aquapine Hills, life moved by rhythms as old as the soil. Roosters crowed before dawn. Women pounded fufu in large wooden mortars, and the scent of firewood smoke clung to the air like breath to skin. There was no rush, no noise from machines, only footsteps, drums, and the hush of leaves. Kwame's family lived in a clay compound on the edge of the village. His father, a healer, was respected but humble. People came from nearby towns for bark and root infusions to treat wounds or fever. But when they met young Kwame, they didn't always know what to say. He would look them straight in the eyes, calm and unblinking, and tell them truths about their lives they hadn't spoken out loud, secrets buried deep, names of dead relatives, sins no one had confessed. Some called it a blessing, others feared it. But behind closed doors, even his own family sometimes struggled with the weight of his presence. His younger siblings tiptoed around him. His mother would cry at night not from sadness, but from the eerie certainty that her son did not entirely belong to this world. There were nights Kwame would speak in languages no one taught him, nights where he'd wake up, covered in ash, claiming the spirits had taken him walking. His grandmother once found him kneeling in the backyard before dawn, eyes closed, chanting a ritual reserved only for senior priests. "What are you doing?" she whispered, shaking. "They asked me to remind them of the path," Kwame answered. Calmly, "The ancestors forget sometimes. I helped them remember." The real change, though, came when war began to stir among the Akan states. At that time, the Akan people made up of various clans like the Fanti, Akayam, Dankira, and Ashanti were scattered, divided, often clashing over land, gold, and pride. The Dankira ruled with an iron hand, demanding tribute and submission from smaller states. Especially the Ashanti. Young men were being conscripted into armies, villages were burned, trade routes were disrupted, and in the midst of it all, the Ashanti disrespected and splintered struggled to find a shared identity. Kwame Anokye was only 13 when he first witnessed the violence up close. One afternoon, returning from the forest with medicinal bark for his father, he saw smoke rising in the distance. A neighboring village had refused to pay tribute to the Dankira king. They were punished. What he found were charred rooftops, elders beaten and left in silence, and children crying with no mothers in sight. That night, Kwame didn't sleep. He sat with his back to the Nyamejua tree, carving symbols into the wood with a stone shard. He spoke no words. But the next morning, he told his father, "If the Ashanti do not find their soul, they will be scattered forever. We must call it down." His father frowned. "Call what down?" Kwame stared into the distance. "The soul of the nation. It's waiting." This was more than a boy's imagination. This was conviction. And soon, whispers began spreading not just in Awukugwa, but in the surrounding villages. They said the boy Anokye was preparing something, that he was chosen, that he knew how to bind the scattered Akan spirits into one sacred oath. But how? He had no army, no rank, no title, and yet, even the warriors began seeking his advice. Chiefs came in secret, kneeling before a boy barely reaching their chest. They asked him about omens, about dreams, about the future, and Kwame always had an answer, never boastful, always serene. But not everyone believed. There were powerful men who saw danger in his influence, spiritual leaders who felt threatened, clan elders who said, "He's just a boy, what does he know of war or unity?" Some even plotted to silence him, to shame him in public. But when they tried, strange things happened. A chief who mocked him lost his voice for 3 days. A rival priest who cursed him had his shrine collapse the next morning. Coincidence? Perhaps. But in a land where belief and reality walk hand in hand, no one dared challenge him again. Still, for all the whispers and awe, Kwame remained burdened. The divisions between the Akan peoples grew deeper. The Dankira's grip tightened. And every night, he felt it, the weight of something waiting to be born. A destiny pounding beneath his ribs like a second heartbeat. He was only 15 when he made a decision that would change history. "If they will not unite by reason," he said, "they will unite by spirit. I will bring them a soul." But how do you give a people a soul? Not a flag, not a crown, but something sacred. Something untouchable, yet real. Kwame Anokye didn't have the answer, not yet. But he knew it would fall from the sky. And when it did, everything would change. They gathered in silence 12 clan chiefs, each seated on a carved wooden stool, their eyes on the boy standing in the center. Kwame Anokye, just 16, wore a white cloth over one shoulder. Not silk, not gold-threaded, just plain white. Soaked in herbs and prayer. Behind him stood his closest companion and future king. Osei Tutu strong, sharp-eyed, and unshakable in his faith in Kwame. Together, they had traveled from village to village, speaking to chiefs, not with threats, but with vision. They painted a future where the Ashanti would not serve, but stand tall, not as 12 separate clans, but as one powerful nation. But words were not enough. The chiefs had heard many promises before. That day, Kwame stood in the sacred grove of Kumasi, now just a small clearing, but destined to become the heart of an empire. The air was heavy with anticipation. The wind barely moved. Birds stopped singing. Some believed even time paused. He stepped forward, holding nothing in his hands, no weapon, no scripture. He looked at the sky and said, "Today, I call upon the spirits of our ancestors, the gods of the rivers, the fire that cooks our food, and the winds that carry our breath. If we are to become one people, we must be given one soul." The chiefs remained quiet. One shifted uneasily. Kwame reached into the air, and the story, from every version passed down, says the same thing. A stool descended from the sky, not dropped, not thrown, but descended gently, glowing, covered in gold, yet unlike anything crafted by human hands. It did not touch the ground. It hovered just slightly above the earth, as if cradled by invisible fingers. Gasps echoed through the grove. A chief fell to his knees. Another wept. This was the Saikadwa Kofi, the Golden Stool. Kwame turned and spoke, his voice no longer boyish, but deep and resonant, as though the ancestors themselves spoke through him. This stool is the soul of the Ashanti nation. It holds the essence of our blood, our bones, our spirit. It cannot be touched by anyone unworthy. It cannot be owned. It must be protected. And just like that, everything changed. The chief's men, who had once distrusted each other, placed their hands on their own stools and took a sacred oath, binding their clans together under the symbol of the Golden Stool. Kwame Anokye became the spiritual custodian, and Osei Tutu, with his blessing, was crowned the first Asantehene, king of the Ashanti. But the unification was only the beginning. The Dinkyira king, hearing of the Ashanti uprising and their mysterious stool, scoffed. He called it child's play magic tricks to fool villagers. But magic or not, the Ashanti had become one, and a united people are not easily bent. When war came, as it always does when power shifts, Kwame did not take up a sword. He went to the forest instead. He gathered herbs, whispered to the river, and prepared rituals that would guard the warriors. Before battle, he blessed the drums, buried charms beneath the soldiers' feet, and tied sacred cords round their arms. At the Battle of Fayus, the Dinkyira forces came in full armor. Proud and confident, the Ashanti fought with fury, but not just of muscle. They believed they were protected by the stool spirit. They believed that as long as the stool stood, they could not fall. The Dinkyira were crushed, their king taken captive. The Ashanti, once tributaries, now stood above their former masters. But even in victory, Kwame Anokye's focus was not conquest. He set to work immediately, crafting laws, rituals, and symbols that would bind the empire long after swords dulled. He declared that no one, not even the king, could sit on the Golden Stool. It was too sacred, too powerful. It was not a seat of authority. It was the nation itself. He built temples, shrines, trained new priests, created complex systems of spiritual governance. And all the while, he remained a calm presence, never drunk on his own influence. People often said he walked as if listening to music no one else could hear. And perhaps he was. Osei Tutu once joked, "Anokye speaks less to men than to the wind." Yet somehow, we all end up following him. But even as the empire grew, there were moments of doubt, conflicts within, challenges from outside. people who began to crave more power, more wealth. Kwame warned against pride, against forgetting the oaths. Once, when a chief desecrated a sacred site, Kwame appeared at his door and simply said, "The gods remember." The next day, the man was struck by a mysterious illness and died by nightfall. Whether truth or legend, people believed, and that belief held the Ashanti together, not just by blood, but by something deeper, spirit. And that spirit, unlike gold or land, could not be stolen. By the time Kwame Anokye was 17, he had already transformed the spiritual landscape of West Africa, not by ruling, but by rooting, by planting a soul where there was once only survival. He had turned belief into a nation. And yet, there was still more to come, because even the strongest roots must face storms, and even the wisest among us must one day disappear. They say the last time anyone saw Kwame Anokye, he was standing barefoot in the rain, staring at the mountains in the distance. He said nothing, just listened to the wine like always. Then he turned and walked into the forest, and never came back. Nobody was found. No tomb, no shrine, just silence. In the Ashanti Kingdom, this wasn't seen as a disappearance. It was a transition. The people believed Anokye had returned to the ancestors, that his spirit, too sacred for ordinary death, had simply been called home. But what he left behind still echoes centuries later, under his spiritual guidance. The Ashanti Empire didn't just survive, it thrived. For over 200 years, it became one of the most powerful and organized kingdoms in West Africa. While European powers scrambled for colonies and gold, the Ashanti maintained sovereignty, negotiating, resisting, and often outmaneuvering foreign forces. They built cities with intricate roads, marketplaces bustling with gold, textiles, and cola nuts. They had complex systems of justice, layered leadership structures, and a culture rooted in deep spiritual order, all of it shaped by the foundation Anokye laid. But more than any gold or glory, what he gave them was meaning. He understood something most leaders never do, that power without soul crumbles, that rituals, symbols, and stories bind people in ways armies never can. The Golden Stool wasn't just a sacred object, it was a mirror. It reminded the Ashanti who they were, even when the world tried to make them forget. And that legacy reached far beyond Ghana. Across the African continent, from Nigeria to Kenya to South Africa, there have always been those who rise not with armies, but with conviction. Young minds who see not what is, but what could be, who speak softly, but shift the ground beneath them. Kwame Anokye was just a teenager when he shaped a kingdom spirit. He wasn't a prince. He didn't wear fine robes. He didn't conquer lands. But he connected people to each other, to the past, and to something greater than themselves. And that is power. His story reminds us that leadership isn't about age. It's about intention. In today's world, where many young Africans feel unheard, unseen, or told they must wait their turn, Anokye's life whispers a quiet rebellion. You do not have to wait to matter. You don't need permission to lead with purpose. You don't need to be the loudest to be remembered. Sometimes, the most powerful movements begin with silence, with stillness, with a boy under a tree drawing symbols no one else understands until they do. So, the next time someone says you're too young to make a difference, remember Kwame Anokye, the teen who didn't fight with fists, but with faith. The boy who didn't ask for a crown, but gave his people a soul, and whose footsteps, though vanished, still guide a nation. Because the greatest leaders don't just build empires, they awaken them.